Gente, muito obrigado por terem vindo. Boa tarde a todos. Quero dar boas-vindas aqui ao nosso webinar. É um prazer muito grande para a gente. Estamos fazendo esse webinar em parceria com o time do GFI da Índia. Então, nosso primeiro webinar aqui que está sendo feito com outra região fora dos Estados Unidos. Estamos super animados para trazer esse conhecimento aqui para o Brasil também. A gente acredita que as proteínas à base de algas, elas são um mercado que ainda pode ser muito explorado aqui no Brasil e que a gente ainda pode trazer essa tecnologia para os produtos que estão aqui. Por isso que a gente convidou os nossos colegas da Índia para falar a respeito disso. Trazendo alguns contextos muito básicos, né? Então, só para quem está sendo marinheiro de primeira viagem aqui nos nossos webinars, o GFI é uma organização que nasceu nos Estados Unidos. Hoje a gente tem Brasil, Israel, Índia, Ásia-Pacífico e Europa, e a gente trabalha para desenvolver o mercado de proteínas alternativas. Então a gente está aqui com 3 frentes de trabalho, uma delas é exatamente essa que estamos vivendo agora, de ciência e tecnologia, onde nosso objetivo é desenvolver o campo científico, no nosso caso no Brasil, e cada uma das unidades nos seus países. A gente quer ajudar pesquisadores, conseguir financiamento para essas pesquisas, trazer realmente conhecimento e fazer com que o Brasil esteja na ponta da ciência de proteínas alternativas, liderando esse setor o quanto antes. Também temos uma área de engajamento corporativo que trabalha com as empresas para elas entrarem nesse setor, lançarem produto, também para encontrarem quem são os cientistas que podem desenvolver os produtos para eles, criar novas tecnologias, fazendo as pontes entre uma área e outra, e com todo o trabalho do regulatório também, que aí a gente vai falar sobre impostos, como que tem que ser o regulatório disso com Anvisa, com mapa, todas as questões que são ligadas ao governo e ao poder público, incluindo também uma das nossas maiores frentes hoje, que é exatamente ter um financiamento público das pesquisas e ter cada vez mais verba de pesquisa para essa área. Pode passar. Eu quero fazer um lembrete de que o GFI é uma ONG, é um instituto, então nós somos 100% baseados na filantropia. Tudo que a gente faz é de graça, todo o trabalho que a gente faz, tanto com empresas quanto com universidades, institutos de pesquisa, com o governo, é um trabalho que a gente não cobra e nós sustentamos o trabalho do GFI 100% com a filantropia. A partir dessa semana, nós já temos um botão de doação funcionando no nosso site, então quem entrar hoje no site gfi.org.br consegue já fazer uma doação através de cartão de crédito, de boleto lá pelo site, e vai ser um prazer se vocês puderem nos ajudar a cumprir com a nossa missão. E eu também estimulo que vocês olhem bastante os nossos recursos, né? Então a gente tem vários recursos, inclusive para cientistas. Nesse link específico, que é o gfi.org.br/pesquisadores, a gente tem um diretório de pesquisa colaborativa, onde vocês podem se inscrever, colocar os dados de que tipo de pesquisa vocês fazem e com isso se conectar com essa comunidade que está trabalhando em proteínas alternativas e também ser encontrados por alguém que está buscando uma solução específica. Pode cadastrar tanto pesquisadores quanto laboratórios e isso é um esforço global, então ao se cadastrar ali vocês vão estar também se cadastrando nessa rede global do diretório. Eu estimulo bastante que vocês olhem o site gfi.org, tem uma parte toda de recursos, resources, e esses recursos tem bastante coisa para cientistas. Um dos que a gente se orgulha mais é exatamente essa questão do grant. Então, uma vez por ano, né, esse ano um pouquinho atrasado por causa do Covid, mas uma vez por ano a gente abre um edital de pesquisa, onde os pesquisadores podem pedir recursos para financiamento das pesquisas em proteínas alternativas. É um edital competitivo, então são algumas que são selecionadas, mas é aberto para o Brasil, então nós ficaríamos muito felizes em ver cada vez mais aplicações vindas do Brasil. A gente já deve, normalmente é em outubro, mas esse ano, por causa dos atrasos aí da pandemia, a gente deve abrir o grant em janeiro. Certo? Esses são os avisinhos que eu tinha para dar no começo. Eu quero apresentar para vocês o time que está aqui e aí já vou passar para o inglês também para a gente poder conversar com os nossos palestrantes, com os nossos painelistas. Então, do time do Brasil, a gente tem a Caterine, que é a nossa doutora, que é a diretora de Ciência e Tecnologia aqui do Brasil, a Cris Ambiel, que é também nossa gerente de Ciência e Tecnologia aqui do Brasil. Então, elas duas é que sabem tudo sobre o campo da Ciência e Tecnologia de proteínas alternativas. Se vocês quiserem Pode mandar e-mail difícil para elas que elas vão saber responder. A Mari é a nossa assistente aqui do GFI Brasil. Ela também pode interagir bastante com vocês se vocês mandarem e-mails pedindo algum tipo de informação, nos processos de inscrição dos grants, nos webinars. Ela está com a gente em tudo. E a Carol Rossettini, que também está aqui, a nossa gerente de desenvolvimento. Então, aquela pessoa que quer ajudar a financiar o nosso trabalho aqui no Brasil é 100% com Carol. Agora eu vou passar rapidamente para apresentar os nossos painelistas. Eu vou mudar o idioma para o inglês e a partir de agora a gente vai ficar em inglês durante o restante da apresentação, ok? So I will start to speak in English now. Thank you all for being here with us. I want to make a just quick introduction of our managing director in India before I move to the more detailed introduction of the panelists. Varun is my counterpart in India, so he does everything that I do here in Brazil. He is also doing in India. Varun, thank you very much for this partnership between GFI Brazil and India, and I will be glad if you can say a few words for us.
Thank you so much, Gustavo. It's really great to be here. I want to echo that I really enjoy that we are doing this in a collaborative manner and sharing some of the research we've been undertaking in India on the algal protein value chain. And I look forward to similar sessions from Brazil to India as well. And really quickly, I think the Brazil ecosystem, especially what GFI Brazil is doing, but everyone in the Brazil ecosystem, like all the people in the audience here today, is a real inspiration to a lot of the countries around the world, especially to us in India, because we think there are a lot of similarities between the two countries in terms of the agricultural biodiversity, in terms of the scientific challenges and the talent. But we are a couple of years behind you, and so we take a lot of inspiration, and sometimes we get a little jealous with all the products that are out in the market in Brazil. So thank you so much for having us, and I'll hand back to you now.
Thank you, Varun. You're very humble. We are also very jealous for all the initiatives that we have in GFI India. Thank you very much for being with us here today. I just want to say something that I forgot in the introductions. So we encourage people to introduce themselves in the chat, which in Portuguese, the bate-papo. And also, if you have questions that you want to be answered in the panel, you have the Q&A tool in here, so you can send questions for the panelists through the Q&A. Okay? I will make now the other introductions. So Siddharth Bhide works at the Science and Technology Specialist at the Good Food Institute India and is based in Mumbai, India. Siddharth holds a master's degree in food science from Rutgers University, USA, and a bachelor degree in food technology from Osmania University in India. Before joining GFI, Siddharth worked as a food scientist at Just in San Francisco and was a key contributor to formulating and manufacturing the Just Egg, plant protein-based egg. In addition, Siddharth has also been part of multiple research and development and food safety internships with General Mills USA, Rutgers Food Incubation Center in USA, and Nestlé India. At GFI India, his role as a science and technology specialist aligns well with his passion for leveraging food science to create nutritious, just, and sustainable food supply. We also have today a conversation with Rama Tentu. She is working as a research fellow at the Good Food Institute India. She is a chemical engineer by education and has experience working in product development at the fast-moving consumer goods space. Before joining the Good Food Institute, Rama had worked with Unilever for 2 years, first as a management trainee and then a technology manager in the skin cleaning R&D department, where she worked on creating the next generation soap bars. So sorry if I'm saying the names wrong, okay? I did my best, so you feel free to correct me. And now for everyone, prepare yourself to be very excited and inspired by these talks today. And thank you all again for being here with us today. And now I will just give the virtual stage for you. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you. Firstly, I'd like to thank Gus for the warm introduction, the entire GFI Brazil team for having us here today and giving us this platform for sharing our work on algal protein, and also to all our attendees over here today who have decided to spend their time with us, learning about this exciting new field of algal proteins and how they can be used in alternative protein products. So without any further delay, let's get started with our presentation. So our presentation today is going to be about how can algal proteins contribute to alternative meat, seafood, egg, and dairy products. At the Good Food Institute India, we did a strategic analysis on creation of algal proteins, and we identified, what are these steps along the way, which will get you a really good, functional, cost-effective algal protein that you can apply in alternative meat, seafood, egg, and dairy products. And what are the opportunities along the way? What are the research opportunities? What are the commercialization opportunities, etc., wherein stakeholders across the globe can contribute and plug into this. So the topics that we'll be covering today is we'll be talking a little bit about the alternative protein landscape across the globe. Then we'll be defining algae. What are algae exactly? And we'll be talking about applications of algae in the alternative protein sector. We'll be talking about companies who already have products. We'll also be talking about companies, who are making products in this space or developing technologies in this space. We'll then be moving on to defining the algal value chain. So how do you create an algal protein? You need to select the right strain, you need to cultivate it in the right manner, harvest it in the right manner, extract proteins in the right manner, functionalize them, etc. So we'll be walking through that. We'll be talking about opportunities across the globe along this value chain. And in the end, we'll be talking about the strategic analysis which the Good Food Institute India team undertook. And we'll be talking about the outputs that we have got as a part of this analysis and how can stakeholders contribute to it. So I'm going to quickly walk through these slides because Gus has already explained them. The Good Food Institute India is a part of an international network of nonprofits, the Good Food Institute, and we are here to accelerate the alternative protein sector. We do a lot of stuff, focused around science and technology, corporate engagement, and policy. And we have 100 plus staff in 6 countries. And really, why we do what we do is to solve the core challenge of how are we going to feed 10 billion in a sustainable fashion by 2050 in means that are, next slide, Rama, in means that are, or in using food systems that are efficient, using food systems that are sustainable, and using food systems that are safe to us and to the environment. And this is why we are here, accelerating this ecosystem. Usually, we talk about alternative proteins into 3 buckets. We classify them into plant-based proteins, and as the name suggests, that these are the proteins that are developed from plants. And there are a lot of products in the market, in Brazil, around the globe, which you might already know of. Globally, there is Beyond Meat, which uses pea protein to make its burgers. There is Impossible, foods making again plant-based beef patties. There is Just Egg, etc. But even within Brazil, there is Fazenda Futuro, Novo Egg, and Nomo Cheese, which are again path-breaking products. So that's the first thing. Second thing is fermentation-based proteins, wherein people are trying to use fermentation like biomass fermentation to actually make meat-like products from it, or people are trying to use microbes as a source to create specific proteins, to create these alternative protein products. So something like Perfect Day, they are using microbes to create milk proteins, or Clara Foods, who are using microbes to create uh, egg proteins. And today's our discussion on algae is going to fall in the fermentation sector too, but on the other side, where we are trying to understand how we can use algal proteins itself to contribute to alternative meat, seafood, egg, and dairy products. And then there is, of course, the third bucket, again, very interesting bucket of cultivated meat, wherein people or researchers around the globe are growing animal cells outside the body of animals, and replicating all the textural flavor features of their animal-based counterparts. So really, GFI's theory of change in a nutshell, we are not asking people to stop eating meat, egg, and dairy products. Instead, we are telling them, let's create meat, egg, and dairy products, but using sustainable means. Let's use plant-based sources. Let's use fermentation-based sources. Let's use cultivated sources to give people what they want, such that they are good for us and good for the environment. So the first generation of alternative protein shifts, as you might already know, because there are already products out in the market across the globe, have been led by plant-based foods. So the examples what I just cited of Beyond, Fazenda Futuro, Novo Egg, Ripple's Milk, etc., all plant-based. But what is happening now is there is growing interest in also newer and novel sources of proteins like microalgae, seaweed, fungi, animal cell culture, etc. And that is where we are going to focus our talk today, and we are going to explore algae as a source of protein and how it can be used in alternative meat, seafood, egg, and dairy products now. So I would hand over the presentation to my colleague Rama Tentu to tell us more about algal proteins, the value chain, and everything about algae in creating alternative meat, seafood, egg, and dairy products.
Thank you, Siddharth. That was a brilliant context setting in terms of where the algae fits in the alternative protein sector. Before we try to understand the details of how algae can be used in alternative protein sector, let's have a look at what algae is and how it has been used traditionally in food and other products as well. So algae are basically aquatic organisms. They're usually found in marine waters, so in our oceans and seas. They are photosynthetic in nature. While they are not classified as plants, they also are capable of doing photosynthesis. There is a huge genetic diversity within algae with more than 35,000 species. But then algae can also be classified into several different types of algae. So when we talk about algae, there are two broad classifications. One is microalgae and other is macroalgae. Microalgae, as the name suggests, is actually a unicellular organism, and we have two types of unicellular organisms within microalgae. One is cyanobacteria and other is eukaryotic microalgae. uh, Microalgae is also commonly known as phytoplanktons, which some of you would know that is eaten by fishes and other marine organisms. On the other hand, we have macroalgae, also commonly known as seaweed. They are multicellular in nature, and they have plant-like structures. Yet they don't come under the plant kingdom. Now, algae as a food ingredient has is not a new thing. This is particularly true for seaweeds, for example. So, seaweeds have been used extensively in Southeast Asian countries in their food products. So, sushi is the most commonly known application of seaweed, in which the nori wrap is used to enclose the sushi rice and other toppings. We have salads and soups as well, in which seaweeds are extensively used in Oriental countries. Um, Seaweeds also have another application as sources of materials like agar, alginate, and carrageenan, which are used as thickeners and gelling agents in the food industry. The applications of microalgae in the food industry are emerging. Microalgae has been known for utilization in biofuel. So microalgae has been extensively explored for the purpose of creating biofuel. But over the last decade, there has been a shift in focus to use value-added components from microalgae like omega-3, omega-9 fatty acids, as well as creating nutraceutical products directly from microalgae because they have extensive health benefits. Having said that, microalgae and seaweed can be sources of food in our daily life. It is also important to note that microalgae and seaweed are also sustainable sources of protein, unlike animal proteins. So if we compare the water utilization and land utilization for microalgae, the data which has been reported extensively in literature is that uh, microalgae consume 67 times less water per ton of production, while they produce 590 times more protein per acre of farmland compared to beef products. This shows the potential of microalgae as a source of protein, although there's no reported data in terms of how sustainable seaweed will be, but there is a general consensus that it will definitely be much more sustainable than animal based protein. Now, coming to how microalgae fits into alternative protein applications. So if we look at the meat analogs which are created by plant-based proteins, for example, soybean protein, pea protein, they the the key properties that we are looking at are typical to the kind of application. So, for example, dairy products require certain viscosity and solubility as a functional property for using these proteins to create alternatives. On the other hand, for dairy products, dairy products, uh, egg based products, emulsification and elasticity are two critical properties. For fish, flavor binding, gelation, adhesion are important properties. And for beef products, fat absorption and adhesion are important properties. So this brings us to the point that since all the proteins which are used in meat analogs have some kind of functional properties, microalgae proteins have also microalgae and seaweed proteins have also depicted some or many of these properties during academic studies, and we believe this is the potential of microalgae to be used in alternative protein applications, and this has already been demonstrated by several companies. The applications of algae in the alternative protein sector is not limited to just sources of protein. They are more than sources of protein. They can provide superior nutritional value due to presence of high concentration of polyunsaturated fatty acids, omega 3, omega 9, vitamins, minerals, and other bioactive compounds. Algae are also distinctive in their unique umami flavor due to uh, due to the fact that they are marine organisms. Since fish and other marine creatures themselves feed on microalgae, the flavor that the seafood has is also umami in nature. So microalgae and seaweed hence find unique applications in creating alternative seafood products as well. And as I had mentioned before, they have specific functional properties like gelation, foaming, emulsification, which have already been demonstrated at a lab scale, making them good candidates for alternative protein applications. Now, to emphasize on how the market is picking up and how important microalgae is in the current alternative protein industry, I just want to talk about a few companies which have been involved in both product development and ingredient development stage. So there is a company called Culina based out of Europe, which has focused on creating tuna from microalgae, seaweed, and plant based proteins. There is Sophie's Kitchen, which is creating various different kinds of products, especially seafood products like fish fillets, salmon, shrimp, etc., from only microalgae. Then there's Algama, which is focused on creating products from microalgae, and they are exclusively involved in downstream operations. We also have companies which are specifically developing ingredients which can go into food applications, and such companies include Fermentalg, which is growing microalgae in a bioreactor and creating neutral tasting microalgae. There is Breville, which is utilizing a novel technology to create high quality and high yielding variety of microalgae. There's back of the yard algae sciences, uh, which is deriving a lot of products from microalgae, including colorants, flavors, biostimulants, in addition to proteins. Similarly, Algamore and Spira are two other companies which have been exploring extraction of proteins from microalgae. Having talked about microalgae, there is a similar trend in the industry of uh, various startups who have become interested in utilizing seaweeds as sources of protein or as sources of polysaccharides, which can help create seafood. And almost all of the companies you see here are making seafood products. So, for example, New Wave Foods is utilizing seaweed based polysaccharides as thickening agents for creating their shrimp. Nova Meat is 3D printing various kinds of meat analogs, and they are using seaweed polysaccharides as substrates. Mara seaweed, on the other hand, is not only using macroalgae in food production, but also cultivating their own seaweed, and they are attempting to make a seaweed burger. There is Seymour, which has been involved in product development, including pasta, bacon, and tuna from seaweed. And we have Viva Maris, which uses both microalgae and seaweed based meat. In terms of ingredient development, there are three companies, Trophic, Oceanium, and Seaweed Company, all of which are focused on extraction of value added components from seaweed, but not just limited to proteins, but high value polysaccharides, bioplastics, and bioactive compounds as well, making them profitable as well as making the proteins extracted from seaweed affordable. Having talked about these companies, I also want to mention that there has been a significant interest from corporate sector for investment into startups which are working on micro and macro algae. Some of the notable examples include Carbion and Nestle venture, Nestle joint venture, and the Algenuity Unilever joint venture. The partnership of Carbion and Nestle is aimed towards specific food and beverage development, and they see microalgae not only as a source of alternative protein but also micronutrients. On the other hand, we have Algenuity, which is geared towards whose partnership with Unilever is geared towards achieving Unilever's ambition to make it easier for people to get plant-based proteins that are good for the planet and delicious at the same time. We have Trophic, as I had mentioned, which is trying to make, which is creating seaweed-based proteins for use in alternative egg, meat, dairy, and seafood applications. And they have actually received a competitive research grant from GFI itself. It is one of the scientists at Trophic are one of the 14 scientists who have received a total of $3 million of research funding. There's Crothan Institute based out of Australia, which has received $3 million to investigate the potential of seaweed as well as microalgae in everyday protein applications. Another company based out of Australia, which has been in news recently, is Provectus Algae, which has again raised $3 million as seed funding for for scaling up their microalgae cultivation and downstream operations. Having established the growing need of the growing interest in the algae, both micro as well as seaweed, I want to bring your attention to the microalgae and seaweed value chain, as we will be explaining this briefly each of the stage of the value chain, so you understand uh, what what kind of innovations and opportunities exist across the value chain. So the first step for so most of the steps are common for microalgae and seaweed. You have strain selection or strain optimization, followed by cultivation of microalgae or seaweed, followed by harvesting and dewatering, and then disrupting the cell, followed by protein extraction and creating algae based meat substitutes. I'll be going explaining each of these steps in detail in the coming slides. So starting with microalgae. So strain selection is a very important component of the value chain. It basically determines all the downstream operations and the cost that will be involved in uh, generating value added products from microalgae. Uh, the diversity of microalgae is huge. So we have anywhere between 35,000 to 1 million species, which is reported in literature. So this gives us an opportunity to use a lot of microalgae strains and screen strains based on various factors. So in order to ensure that the costs for production downstream are upstream as well as downstream are reduced, we need to focus on high growth rate strains, strains with high protein content, uh, strains which are resistant to pathogens, strains which can survive in extremely uh, ex- uh, ex- in extreme environments like high pH, high salinity, to prevent any kind of contamination. And we need strains which do not have toxins or allergens and are safe to consume by humans. All this leads to ease of downstream operations and ease of cultivation and harvesting. And these are the key factors that need to be kept in mind while screening for efficient strains. Once you have selected the strains, there are three different methods by which microalgae can be cultivated. The most popular method of cultivation is photoautotropic cultivation. As I said before, photosynthesis is the main mode of growth for microalgae. One can cultivate microalgae in an open system like an open raceway pond, as you can see in the photograph. One can also cultivate it in a closed system in a photobioreactor where you can control various conditions like pH, temperature, the amount of gases that are fed in, the concentration of various nutrients. Obviously, for closed systems, the cost is high, but and that is why open raceway pond is actually the most common method used for cultivation. Then we have heterotropic cultivation, which is very similar to fermentation. Here, the microalgae grows in absence of light, and not all microalgae can grow in absence of light. Hence, certain species which grow heterotropically are selected for this kind of cultivation. And the main advantage is that some of these species can give up to 20 times more productivity compared to photoautotropic cultivation. Mixotropic cultivation, as the name suggests, is a combination of photoautotropic and heterotropic cultivation, and this is something which is underway in academic research, and there has been limited industry development in this space. The next stage, once you have cultivated microalgae, is to concentrate the mixture. The need to concentrate microalgae is because the concentration of biomass is typically very low. So, for example, in open raceway ponds is as low as zero point 0.5 grams per liter. In order to concentrate it, there are various techniques that can be used, including sedimentation, flocculation, flotation, filtration, centrifugation, etc. And this is typically achieved in a two-step process. Since the concentration is very low, first the concentration is increased up to 1 to 5%, and then in the second step, which is called dewatering, the concentration is increased up to 25%. After the concentrated microalgae is obtained, the next step is to disrupt the cell wall. Now, why is it important to disrupt the cell wall? It is because the cell wall of microalgae, unlike other organisms, uh, is very strong. And in order to access the intracellular components, which also includes the proteins, one needs to break through the cell wall and release these intracellular components. And these typically involve high energy intensive techniques like bead milling and high pressure homogenization. Both are well established technologies in the industry. But there are other technologies which involve chemical disruption or enzymatic disruption, which I will not be discussing here. The next step after you release all the components of from the cell into the bulk is to separate the protein and concentrate it. First, all other components like lipids and oils are removed, and then whatever is left, that mixture is solubilized at high pH. So the protein solubilization happens at high pH. The mixture is then separated to obtain a soluble mixture and an insoluble mixture using centrifugation. The soluble mixture, which consists of soluble proteins, are then separated by precipitation of proteins at an isoelectric point and then drying this precipitated protein mixture. Now, coming back to the value chain, a similar value chain, but very different dynamics is true for seaweed as well. Coming to seaweed, seaweed for seaweed, the mode of strain selection is slightly different because one, seaweed doesn't have so many such diversity of species. Hence, there are limited number of species which you can use. Uh, since seaweed are capable of both sexual and asexual reproduction, there is a possibility to use crop modification techniques which have been used traditionally in agriculture, and all these novel breeding techniques can be optimized to obtain high protein content, high growth rate, adaptation to local environment, resistance to pathogens, and uh, ensure that they are safe to consume. So, so the parameters that we need to optimize are similar as microalgae, but the method to achieve this optimal strains is different. In terms of cultivation, seaweed is most commonly cultivated by seaweed farmers in shallow marine waters. Uh, they usually have seedlings tied to ropes in bamboo rafts, and these are left in the open sea, and these seaweeds grow over a period of a month or two. This is called nearshore cultivation. And the second technique, which is emerging now, is the inland cultivation, wherein seaweed is cultivated in tanks with seawater. Here, here the farmers are able to get much higher control of the quality of seaweed because they can control pH, temperature, nutritional quality, and quantity. But having said that, inland cultivation is something which is still under development. Most of seaweed is still cultivated through nearshore cultivation. After cultivation, just like crops, seaweed is also manually harvested. It's the most common way of harvesting. But in case there are industrial operations through which cultivation of seaweed is taking place, then automatic harvesting methods or mechanized harvesting is also possible. After harvesting, typically seaweed needs to be cleaned to remove any kind of contaminants or material stuck on the surface of seed, and these are sorted for further downstream operations. In the next step, after the cleaning and sorting of seaweed, seaweeds are typically dried because these seaweed can be extremely volatile. They can degrade over time. Hence, it is important to dry them. And after drying, cell disruption is not an issue for seaweed, unlike microalgae, uh, because their cellular structure allows for easy release of intracellular components. Hence, it is uh, uh, sufficient to shred or reduce the particle size uh, to achieve high yield downstream protein extraction. The protein extraction of seaweed, again, the process will remain same. So once the seaweed is shredded, the components like polysaccharides are extracted, and then proteins can be extracted by a similar process as described earlier. However, one thing to note is that the parameters for processing will greatly differ between microalgae and seaweed, and this will also depend on the species which is selected. So, depending on the species, each of the steps needs to be optimized for getting maximum yield from protein extraction. Now, having introduced you to the whole value chain of seaweed and microalgae, I am going to present to you the opportunities across the value chain and the work that different companies are doing at each stage of value chain. Coming to the upstream opportunities and starting with microalgae, strain selection is one area which is very interesting, given that I just mentioned that the diversity of microalgae is high, and as microalgae reproduce only by asexual reproduction, there are methods to modify it genetically, but then we are restrict. It can be restrictive because of particular regulations of a country. Hence, to identify high yielding strains with properties which are relevant for us, for example, high protein content, high growth rates, resistance to pathogens, etc. There are companies which are working on developing methodologies to identify high yielding varieties. Phenoportal by Harvey Bates at the University of Technology, Sydney, has created an open source tool to help algal biotechnologists to isolate elite strains of algae which have superior strains. And the software as well as the hardware has been is something which you can find online. And Phenoportal basically allows both industry and researchers to screen different species of microalgae for their ability to yield novel products by exploiting their phenotypic plasticity. Coming to cultivation, at the cultivation stage, the main challenge has been cost. Since cultivation, harvesting, and dewatering are one of the most cost they are most energy consuming, as well as they involve high capital costs. Most of the companies have been involved in reducing the cost of production of microalgae. So at this stage, there are three leading companies which have been working in this space. One is the Global Algae Innovation based out of US, which is utilizing autophototropic cultivation, which is raceway ponds, to lower costs throughout the cultivation process by reducing the use of nutrients, optimizing the sunlight, optimizing the infrastructure, etc. They have been able to bring down the conventional cost of microalgae from $5 per kg to 0.8 kg, $8 per kg. Uh, Another company which is innovating in this field is Breville, which is using both heterotropic and autotropic cultivation, which is mixotropic cultivation, for getting high quality microalgae at much lower costs. They are able to do this. They are able to create cultivation systems which are highly sterile and fully automated, with yields that can be 200x more than what is already reported. So very interesting work done by Breville. A similar company which is working in this space is also Rocket, which is based out of France, and they have uh, specialty products which range from starch extracted from corn, wheat, potatoes, peas, and microalgae. So a lot of scope to innovate here, and already a lot of work happening. Harvesting and dewatering is another area which takes up to 25 to 30% costs of production. Here, there are two companies which have been pioneering in this field. One is the Zobi harvester, which is again by Global Algae Innovation, since they were trying to bring down the overall biomass production costs, and harvesting and dewatering already contribute 25 to 35%. They have developed this novel technology which is available uh, to other companies under licensing. Similarly, Algex, interestingly, is a footwear company which is making footwear from microalgae, and they are targeting existing algal blooms and using bloom technology to create concentrated concoctions of microalgae. Alfa Laval, a very well-known company in the heavy equipment industry, has also been working in this area. As I had mentioned before, in the downstream operations, we have cell disruption, protein extraction, and product development. And in the area of cell disruption, as I said, uh, bead milling is one of the common methods, and Buehler has actually optimized bead milling from microalgae for low energy consumption and high yield. Other companies related to protein extraction, I've already mentioned about Spira, Fomentalg, and Algama, which are involved in ingredient creation. Then we have product development companies like Culina and Sophie's Kitchen, which is involved in creating seafood-based products from microalgae. Now coming to seaweed, uh, in the upstream opportunities for seaweeds, there is limited scope of work to be done, partly because this area has been highly explored already. The Southeast Asian countries have been growing seaweeds and vast amounts for last several decades, and but there still exists some opportunities both in strain selection as well as cultivation and harvesting. In strain selection, although there are no companies which are particularly creating methods to identify high yielding varieties, there is a scope for knowledge transfer from the East Asian countries to adapt seaweed strain selection for local conditions. In case of cultivation and harvesting, as I mentioned, inland cultivation is a new technology which has been explored to create premium high quality seaweeds. And Sikura and Monterey Bay Seaweeds are two companies which have been in this space. Um, and in terms of downstream opportunities, uh, there are few companies which again I have mentioned before, which are involved in protein extraction and product development. Here, the opportunity lies not only in the extraction phase by exploring a biorefinery like concept, which is to extract different kind of value added components, not just proteins, which can further subsidize the costs of the proteins that have been extracted. But in case of product development, there is a scope to go beyond using polysaccharides in the alternative protein sector, because a lot of companies have been primarily focused on using agar, alginate, carrageenan, etc. But there is a scope to use proteins as well from seaweeds. Having talked about these opportunities across the value chain, I just want to give a quick overview of larger opportunities that lie that lie across the value chain as well as across different stakeholders who are involved. So, for example, in case at stain selection stage, there is need for stain optimization, which remains a challenge for startups who venture into the space of microalgae as well as seaweed production. The need for low cost engineering system across the value chain still exists. And as I had mentioned earlier, there are the companies who are working to innovate in this space. There is a need for corporate investment across the value chain again, because although there have been investments as I showed you before, there is scope for getting further momentum into this field by pumping in more capital. In terms of technology development, while the upstream, which is production of microalgae and seaweed cultivation and harvesting, is fairly developed, there is a scope to further develop cell disruption and protein extraction, as well as creating as well as creating meat, egg, dairy, and seafood substitutes. The reason I say that the maturity is low here is because the costs need to be optimized, as well as the technology needs to be scaled up from a lab scale to to pilot and then to a manufacturing scale. The last but not the least is the market pull and consumer awareness. While people know, there are highly aware consumers who know about microalgae and its benefits. There a lot of people actually have not even heard of it. Seaweed is commonly known, uh, but in Asian countries, but it is not widely used in our diet. So there is a need to create awareness about the benefits of using these sources of proteins, both for nutritional benefits as well as sustainability. Now, summarizing the opportunities in this space, as I said before, in case of microalgae, the key unlock is in bringing down the cost of production. So, for upstream operations, the key focus should be on optimizing cost. Although few companies are doing this, we need more innovation in this space. The second is that there is little attention which has been paid to downstream operations, as I just highlighted, and there is scope for innovation and technology development for both protein extraction and product development. In case of seaweed, as the scope for upstream development is limited, hence the focus should be on valorizing value-added component and exploring the biorefinery route. The second opportunity is to utilize proteins from seaweeds and go beyond using polysaccharides for product development. Uh, Now I would just want to summarize the presentation for you, since there was a lot of information that I had shared, but the main idea is that microalgae and seaweed both have huge potential for food applications, especially in the alternative protein sector. The diversity of microalgal species and the ability to create more diversity from seaweed species through different modes of breeding allows for exploring novel functionalities, applications, and nutritional profiles. There is growing consumer awareness and industry interest in microalgae, so this is the right time to venture into this field, create more innovations across the value chain, and build this industry further. Now, I would like Siddharth to take you through our strategic analysis, which we have conducted over the last few months, and he'll talk about the outputs from our study.
Thank you, Rama, for the wonderful presentation. Just following up on the details which Rama shared with you on which are the different steps in the algal value chain to create algal proteins, and companies working in this area along the value chain. What we have done at the Good Food Institute India is do a strategic analysis, which essentially encompasses a thorough literature search along different stages of the value chain, understanding what really happens at each stage and what are the different ways of going about it. And in addition to that, talking to experts globally, working in microalgae or in seaweeds to understand, which includes industry, which includes academia, to really gain practical knowledge on how things work and how we can advance the value chain. And as a result of this exercise, which was over 3 months, we have gotten two outputs from this. The first output is what we call opportunities dashboard, wherein we have listed out 40 plus opportunities, very specific opportunities, detailing what can be particular done in a certain segment of the value chain, who can do it, etc. And this is something that has already been launched. And in just a few seconds, I'll be just going over one of the examples from this opportunities dashboard. We also have a technical a review paper coming out in December, which will be glad to, and it's going to be an open access paper with, our, which essentially would entail our entire strategic analysis. So whatever information was shared in this presentation today would be included in this report, along with opportunities and next steps, etc. And this is what I was talking about, the opportunities dashboard, 40 plus white space opportunities for stakeholders across academia, industry, startup, policy, and investment firms to explore the algal protein space. And the way we have presented this opportunities dashboard is that for every opportunity, we define the opportunity, we define who are the stakeholders who can actually work in this opportunity to solve this bottleneck, what is the ease of implementation. Now this for this opportunity, and what is the maturity level. Now this opportunities dashboard could be a little specific to India, but then you could look at the opportunities, and you could understand the ease of implementation and maturity level in your region, and see how you can solve that bottleneck to plug into the algal protein supply chain regionally and globally. So that brings us to the end of the presentation today. And as I was mentioning earlier, our opportunities dashboard is already live on the GFI India's website, and we'll also share the link with you in the chat. But in addition to it, we also have a technical review paper coming out in December, which will be on our website too. But you could also write to us at scitech.india@gfi.org to indicate your interest in receiving this report, and we can send it to you when it's launched. In addition to that, if you're just curious, if you have any questions following this presentation on the strategic analysis, what we have done and how you could contribute to the algal protein sector, please feel free to reach out to us via this email ID, or you could reach out to Catherine, and Catherine could direct those queries to us. Or in general, if you want to know more about the different projects that we have going on at the Good Food Institute India, again, please feel free to write to us. So with that, I would like to thank everyone in the audience and the entire Good Food Institute Brazil team for giving us this platform today, and we could take any questions now. And I see there are a few in the chat, so we could answer them.
Excellent, Siddharth and Rama. So thank you so much for your excellent presentation. So there are a lot of great opportunities in this field. So thank you so much for sharing with us this amazing landscape. We do have some questions for you. I know that Siddharth has already replied some of them. So let's take the ones that you haven't, Siddharth. I think the first one is related to species. So are there species of algae already identified for the production of eggs, dairy products, meat and seafood plant-based products?
Yeah. Rama, do you want to start with this one? Yeah.
Yes, so there are species which are being commonly explored. So spirulina, for example, which has about 70% of protein content in it, is one of the most widely explored option for use in alternate meat, egg, dairy based products. We also have chlorella, which has a specific advantage in terms of heterotrophic cultivation. So it can so typically algae is green in color. So and chlorella can be cultivated via heterotrophic cultivation method, and you can get decolorized microalgae, which helps in the product development process. And there are other reports which you can find in literature where different kinds of microalgae have been explored, but most commonly used are spirulina and spirulina and chlorella. In terms of seaweeds, there are many seaweeds which have been explored, but not that extensively because again. Polysaccharides are the ones which are polysaccharides are of interest, but there are species like Glaciaria, Porphyra, Ulva, etc., which have been explored, but not much in detail for direct applications as protein.
Thank you, Rama. Just adding one quick point to that, there has been research. There is research being done across the globe in various research groups, wherein they have taken specific species of algae and demonstrated their extrudability to. One such research group is located in ETH Zurich, and they have shown a certain species of chlorella can be used in plant-based meat or extrusion-like products. Yeah, so please take a look at this group at ETH Zurich, led by Professor Alexander Mathers.
Excellent, thank you. So we have one question from Amanda, and she is interested in the regulatory aspect. So she is interested in knowing which country has the protein extracted approved for use in food, and which strain is approved. Do you have any information to share with us?
So across different countries, like the regulations will vary. But in general, what we have found is that for both microalgae and seaweed, the company which is exploring protein extraction needs to apply for a certain kind of nutritional trial or generate data, because it typically comes under novel food. However, there are species, for example, spirulina, which have been known for a while, and there is already data on them, so it's easier to get approvals on them. But for less known species or exploring new species, one needs to generate food safety data in order to back up any product development activities. And here, for seaweeds, I believe that there are certain species of seaweeds which have been used in human diet for a while. So again, while the companies will need to present data on based on the nutritional studies, it might be easier to get approvals based on the history of use of the whole biomass. But nevertheless, there needs to be data generated because protein is being extracted from the biomass.
Oops, now my mic is open. There is one question regarding, taste. We know that algae have the great nutritional potential for application in food products. So what do algae taste like in food products? Is there any off taste? Interesting question.
They might taste horrible depending on person to person. But yeah, the general view is that one, the color is of course off because it's green in color. And most of the study do report that they have off taste. So you need to do some kind of further processing to have highly refined proteins without off flavors. The whole biomass definitely has the off taste, and again it differs from species to species. In case of seaweeds, so seaweeds taste like sea, and as usual, like people are used to that kind of taste. But then for protein applications, you would need neutral taste, and again this would require further downstream processing to obtain proteins which do not have these off flavors.
Yeah, just adding on to that, a point which Rama mentioned, this could actually be an advantage in creating seafood analogous products, wherein instead of using the actual sea animals, you could use seaweeds to get that flavor, and that increases the acceptance of your final food product. So it could work both ways. It could be a positive thing, but as Rama was rightly mentioning, they do have an off flavor. Depends on species to species, but there are technology companies and researchers across the globe working to solve this aspect of flavor and get them neutralized. Just like it is happening in plant-based proteins too. The versions of plant proteins what we see now are much more flavor neutral when compared to what we saw like 5 to 10 years ago. So it's a positive thing.
So in this context, do you think that the greatest, let's say, potential application would be for seafood products?
Yes, definitely, but I would not limit to that. So seaweeds definitely have been very specifically been used for seafood products. But microalgae, for example, there is demonstrated data that they have great emulsification properties. So which give them a way into use in alternative dairy products, as well as any other products which require some kind of emulsification potential. So I would say yes, seaweeds because of the taste and the unique flavor, but it doesn't mean that it can't be used in other spaces as well.
Yeah, and
Good.
adding to that, I think one of GFI's grantees, Trophic, I think they are exploring seaweed for
Yep.
the red color. What they have. So something very exciting. Impossible has used fermentation as a platform to get like hemoglobin as a color and a flavor additive. And I think Trophic is trying to see how they could use the color functionality of this red seaweed. So as Rama was mentioning, seafood, yes, but a lot of other applications and potential also exist.
Great opportunities for additional research, isn't it?
Yep.
Okay, so we do have I think that is a very, let's say, complicated question regarding costs. So would you have like an idea in terms of the cost involved in this production, and also this person is interested in knowing more about the necessary equipment to start a small industry plant. So maybe do you have any tips or kind of general information in terms of costs to share with us?
So at this point, we are still evaluating the costs across the value chain. So this is an exercise which we will be including in our technical review paper. So I would really urge you to actually go through our technical paper, because this talks about the different kinds of equipment and different kinds of technologies at each stage of value chain. So you can make a choice based on the comparison of different technologies. And of course, there needs to be a lot of internal R&D work that also needs to be done in order to select the right strains, the right cultivation conditions, subsequently watering, harvesting, and downstream operations. But coming back to the costs, The cost of operations can be high. The cost of production can be again highly variable depending on how you innovate on the production system itself. So if you are a company which is directly buying microalgae, the which can cost anywhere from $5 per kg to $25 per kg depending on the species. It's the cost of biomass, and you can imagine any kind of downstream operation will only increase the cost, and this right now is like way higher than, let's say, soya protein or pea protein costs. But for the specific cost of equipment right now, we are not in a position to be able to answer that, but happy to discuss about the technologies.
Great, Rama. So we are looking forward to reading your paper. Yes, it's coming. Marcella, she is asking about suppliers of algae and also seaweed for a industrial scale. Do you have any suggestions?
Yes, so it's a tough question to answer because many companies who want to do industrial scale operations are struggling with getting good quality of microalgae, because what ends up happening is that people who want to do downstream operations end up doing the cultivation themselves, because the whole industry is still upcoming. But having said that, I have mentioned companies like Global Algae Innovation, Breville, Algamore, and uh, Fermentalg, for example. So these are companies which are involved in production of microalgae. Some of these are also involved in like downstream operations, like they can supply ingredients as well based on microalgae. But again, the kind of volumes that we are looking for, I would be very conservative on that end, because the production volumes are not that high as of now. As of for seaweed, I have mentioned companies like Sikura, which are doing inland cultivation, and they are basically selling premium seaweeds because of the high control of cultivation conditions. But if that is not a concern, uh, many of the people who are getting seaweeds and extracting components from it are actually importing it from Southeast Asian countries, where cultivation of seaweed is a very common practice. So either you import seaweeds, or you do, like, some companies are also involved in cultivating the seaweeds themselves, those who have access to the coastline.
Okay, great. I think I have the last question from Edson. He is asking about to approve alternative protein products. Could you please share with us previous experiences in other countries, or even your thoughts for the future, short, medium, and long terms? So,
sorry, Catherine, can you repeat? I was not able to hear the first part of the question.
So Edson is interested in understanding more about the food safety aspect of the algae and seaweed as protein sources. So do you have, could you share some more details about the food safety aspect? And also he is interested in maybe some countries' experiences in terms of regulation.
Yeah, so a very important aspect is like safety and regulation, because as I said, microalgae has more than 35,000 species, and not very few species have history of safe use. Hence, it's extremely important to screen for toxins and allergens present in microalgae. There are certain microalgae, especially certain kind of cyanobacteria and diatoms, which have been reported to have toxins content. So while you are doing your strain selection, it's extremely critical to find any reported data on toxins or allergens, and also do your own studies in order to identify if there are any safety concerns with using the microalgae. The second area where for microalgae safety concerns come up is during cultivation. So especially in open raceway ponds, there is a chance of contamination from other pathogens if the conditions are not maintained properly. So there is following good manufacturing practices is critical in order to maintain that. And in the downstream, of course, the regular food safety practices, of course, need to be followed. In case of seaweeds, seaweeds have the tendency to accumulate heavy metals. So, for example, Southeast Asian countries where, or even some European countries where seaweed is cultivated in marine waters, it is important that the marine waters are not polluted or with heavy metal or any kind of industrial waste, as well as any kind of sewage affluents as well, because pathogens can stick to the surface of seaweeds, or uh, heavy metals can get accumulated, which can eventually go into the food system and cause different kinds of health concerns. So, with respect to seaweed, it's the cultivation conditions which need to be monitored in order to obtain safe to consume seaweeds. In case of seaweeds, the problems are less complicated because most of the seaweeds, a lot of seaweeds species which are commonly cultivated already have been a part of human diet. If they are not a part of human diet, of course, we would need to do a toxicologic or evaluation in order to understand what kind of uh, 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 safety concerns they have. And the last part of the question, which is across the countries, what are the kind of regulations? So, as I said, for those for example, for EU and the US, we know that uh, the food products which have history of safe use, of course, like they are under the GRAS status, which is generally recognized as safe. They of course don't need any more data to be presented unless there is some modification to the ingredient. However, if there's a modification to the ingredient or a new species is introduced, then you would need to do some kind of nutritional trials and present data saying that uh, the species is safe to consume, and hence this all these strains and ingredients would fall under novel food regulation.
Thank you, Rama. And I think a good thing to add, Rama, is, I think, is that we'll also be having a section on policy and regulatory aspects of algae in our final report, which will be out in December, along with the cost. So again, another good reason to send us an email on scitech.india and express your interest in receiving the report.
Great, great. One more reason to get access to your report. Looking forward to it. Yes, we are just on time. So once again, on behalf of GFI Brazil, it was a great pleasure to welcome GFI India in our webinar. So thank you so much, Siddharth and Rama, for taking the time to joining us today. So a special thank you to Varun as well for joining our webinar today. So GFI Brazil is really proud of all the amazing work that you guys are doing. So thank you so much. And for our participants, thank you for joining one of our webinars edition. So thank you again, and looking forward to seeing you all in our next webinar. Stay safe, take care, have a good afternoon and a good evening. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you. Thank you again.
Thank you.